Today we have Michael Boren with us, Chief Technology Officer for Beck Technology, and he'll be taking us through this upcoming release. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that. All right, so I wanted to start out by thanking everybody for attending today. I really appreciate your time. I wanted to also kind of, before we kick this thing off, let you know that there are a lot of functionality that is in this release, too much that we think to get through 1 hour presentation. So what we'd like to do is set the presentation time for about 30 to 45 minutes with an additional 15 minutes of Q&A. And then we're going to set a follow-up presentation for the remainder of the functionality. We'd like to try to get through all the functionality in 2 presentations. It may take 3. So I just wanted to let you guys know that there will be a follow-up to this for the remainder of the functionality inside of 2017 1.0. All right, without further ado, so the 2017 1.0 version of Estimator primarily focused on what we consider core estimating functionality. So we have an industry advisory board. We spend a lot of time speaking with our clients, trying to figure out what it is that matters most, finding different ways that we can save time when it comes to creating estimates. And a lot of the feedback we got was in and around core estimating functionality being paramount for the next release. So that really helped us guide our development team to determining what we wanted to spend our time on and what features went into this version. And with that, I always encourage each and every one of you to please reach out or allow us to reach out to you and let us know where you would like to see this technology progress into. We have a couple of high-level buckets for functionality inside of 2017 1.0. What I thought I'd do is start off with just kind of from the beginning on some of the new pieces that we've added. First and foremost, we've added this ability to have formalized templates. So in DESTINI Estimator 2017 1.0, you now have this concept of a traditional template estimate. We have a template directory, so you actually have the ability to have shared template libraries. So if you want to start from a common platform, if you use template estimates for vertical markets, or if you just want to have some basic things pre-populated, you have that capability now, and you have the ability to share that as a team. So when you create a new estimate, you have that ability to create from an existing template. You have the ability to create a just brand new blank estimate, or you can even create a template on the fly from an existing estimate. And templates are treated a little differently. So, for example, if I just open this template here, I don't have the ability to save over the top of that. So when I go to save, if I were to try to save this estimate now, it would prompt me to save this estimate as a new file name. So you don't have the ability to overwrite those templates. That's a lot of the main functionality of the templates, is not only do they store all those a basic starting point of those, however you want to begin your estimates, but it also prevents you from overriding the existing templates so that it doesn't mess anybody else up in the future. So here I have a template, and in my template I've stored some basic layouts, basic filters, and then I even have kind of a way that I like to view my estimate already created. And that's just one of the many ways that you can use templates. I'm not going to go into a lot of this functionality because it's pre-existing. So today I'm really going to focus on only the new pieces of Estimator. All right. What I wanted to do is kind of dive right into this concept of having this focus on better estimating and core estimating functionality. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between DESTINI Estimator and DESTINI Data Manager. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the Data Manager application is the user interface that we have on top of our SQL database. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to be talking about kind of this marriage of where you set your data up in your database and how that shows up now inside of Estimator. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is this ability now, when we perform a takeoff, that you can customize almost every piece of this takeoff, whereas you didn't have that capability before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate down, go to an assembly, and just highlight some of the pieces on this view. So here, you'll notice right out of the bat, we have this new ability to specify WBS properties while performing takeoff. These values will be persisted, which means they'll stick around as you perform takeoff in your estimate. Before, you had to perform takeoff and then go back and set them after the fact. Now I can do it on the fly. So here I'm taking off a standard slab on grade. I've specified that my system is going to be office. This list of properties, and I'll show you how this works in a little bit, is fully customizable, and it's one of the things that we really like about Estimator is this ability to declutter the user interface and really only show the estimators the parts and pieces that they need to be concerned with without showing them all the other pieces and making them sort of search through menus and toolbars to find what they're looking for. So I can pick from a list. Here I'm applying cost to my office. I also can pick from a list, and I'm going to apply the current takeoff to floor 1. And all this is basically doing is it's setting all of the WBS properties for the line items that will be applied from this assembly to these values for system and floor number respectively. You still have all the standard functionality, like the ability to have images tied to your estimates so you can guide junior estimators through kind of what these questions may or may not mean for them. You also have some new functionality that's not 100% in your face, but it's always there for you. So you have the ability, for example, to rename these assemblies or the assembly descriptions on the fly. This does not edit the cost database. This only edits this instance of the assembly. So if you wanted to, as you're performing takeoff, provide something specific for this estimate, you can, so that you can better identify these assemblies. You also have that same capability below for the line items that are within the assembly. So I can change things like item number just by typing in here, and it's not just numbers, it could be text, so I can type in whatever I'd like. I can also change the line item description and name as well. So if I wanted to customize that line item for this assembly, for this takeoff, I can. Again, this is not editing the cost database at this point. Another thing you may notice are the prompting questions. So in the previous versions of Estimator, we would automatically create the questions that would be asked to the user when you're performing an assembly or line item takeoff. And that would typically look like, what is the, give you the name of the variable and then a question mark, which worked okay for most of the time, but there were some times when it didn't quite make a lot of sense. Now, in 2017.1.0, you have the ability to completely customize each one of the questions that the estimator is presented with. So you not only, when I click in here, have the ability to give them some prompting text on what they should enter, but also ask a better, well more formatted question so that they clearly understand what they need to provide here. So in this example, I'm going to type in the value for square feet for the area of slab I'm going to pour, so we'll do 2,500. Another piece that I wanted to show is the ability for line items to include or not include themselves. This is not new functionality per se, but it has been enhanced for this version. So I'm going to answer a couple of these questions. We'll give this slab on grade 3,000 psi. We will give it maybe a 6-inch thick slab. We'll use pump concrete here. You'll notice as I answer these questions, those line items are appearing below. One of the pieces that has been enhanced about this ability to optionally include or not include items is if I come back here and I change that from 3,000 psi to 4,000 psi, it changes the exact item location. And that's because that's exactly where I specified that location. So in the previous version, these items would sort of move around a little bit because there wasn't an ability to control their exact location in the assembly. Now in 2017.1.0, which changes both to Estimator and Data Manager, you have that ability to specify exactly the order the line items will appear, as well as exactly the order the questions will appear inside of your assembly. So you can craft this to look and behave however you'd like. I'm going to finish answering these questions, so we'll give it 1,500 feet of perimeter, which will get us our formwork and grade beam, and then I'll give the slab, ground slab, a little bit of termite treatment. So we have basically a set of items here that have been quantified and priced. Before I move further forward, you also have the ability to completely customize the pricing, and any other pieces of information you'd like for any of these items. So for this concrete, for example, I can click this ellipsis and directly edit any property of that line item in this assembly for this takeoff. So just like the descriptions before, this is not editing the database. This is just editing the line item inside of this particular instance of this assembly takeoff. And this gives us some power that we didn't have before. So in previous versions, if I were to, and let me just pull this over a little bit, if I were to come and I were to edit the price or quantity of any of these line items, it would not know exactly where I wanted to put that price. So it would basically roll all of that information up and throw it into other costs because it just didn't know if that was going to be labor or material. Now I can come in and I can specify exact pricing values for each one of the price categories of these line items. You also have the ability to edit things like item number, unit, even the unit reference. And you can also specify any of the WBS properties for this line item here on the fly, which works a lot of times, especially if you want to set unit format values, which may change based off of where this particular line item is being placed. If you want to get really fancy, you even have the ability to edit the quantity formula for this line item on the fly. So I could come in here, type in a new value or a new calculation, and it will actually change the questions that are presented after I hit OK. I don't want to go too deep into that, but you do have full flexibility here to make any changes you'd like to both how the item costs itself or quantifies itself, as well as the pricing that it's applied and the WBS properties for each of the items. All right, now that I've got a basic takeoff, one of the other new pieces of functionality here just inside the assembly takeoff form is you don't have this OK and close button anymore. You have an update, add, and close concept. And when you're not tying your cost directly to quantity takeoff, so in this particular case, I'm not sketching anything in 2D, and I don't have a 3D model that I'm applying my quantity takeoff to. When you're not doing that, you have a little bit more of a traditional interface when it comes to your estimating. So here, I'm just going to click Add. And what that's going to do, if I just bring this down a little bit, you can see that it's added cost to my estimate, but it's also showing you a new window here that shows that takeoff on the right. And what that gives me the ability to do is not only to continue performing takeoff without having to go back in and find that assembly or line item and retake it off. So if I have 10 different slabs that I want to go ahead and create, it really saves me a lot of time. I also can come back in and click on any existing takeoff, and these will be available even if I exit out and come back to the screen, and it will pre-answer all the questions based off of that particular takeoff. So now that I've clicked on here, you can see it pre-answered the questions based off of this. And here, instead, what I'll do is I'll say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and use this same assembly, but I'm going to pour floor 2, and let's say floor 2 has only got 2,000 square feet, and that's going to be maybe 3,000 psi and a 4-inch slab, right? So again, as I answer the questions, you can see the line items below are quantifying themselves. This will be pumped. We'll give it a different perimeter, maybe 25, so 1,250 linear feet, and then we're not going to pre-treat the elevated deck, so we're just going to say 0 on that one, which should get rid of the termite treatment down below. Now I can add this. And again, these values were persisted, so if I were to take and add this again, floor 2 would be added to each of the items in the next takeoff. But what I will do is, let's go ahead and pour a couple more slabs. I'm going to assign this to 3, hit OK. Maybe go to the next one, assign it to 4, hit OK. And let's say that I made a mistake here, and I want to make a change. So here I've just had the 4th floor pour, but really the area was different, or the concrete was different. Let's just say that for the 4th floor it's going to be a little bit smaller. I can always come back in and update that takeoff on the fly. So now I've just done 4 assembly takeoffs of the same assembly with different variable values, but because of these changes I've been able to do it a whole lot faster than you've ever been able to do it before in Estimator. I'm going to close out of this, and now I want to show you some of the other new pieces of functionality that are available directly inside of our estimate view. So here there are some new symbols you may notice off to the side where you have a couple of overlapping boxes. Now in Estimator, in our estimate view, we have this ability to roll up line items automatically. And so what that does is it will roll up any line item that it determines to be exactly the same as another item. And it figures out what it considers exactly the same based off of which columns are visible. So for those of you who may be profiler users, this behaves exactly the way that Profiler's estimate view works. But what this gives you the ability to do is never have to have duplicate items in your estimate. So if I wanted to, say, actually have unique values for each one of these, I could open my column chooser, navigate over, and just pull out the takeoff number column. This will basically give a unique value for all the line items in my estimate. And you can see now that they've all split apart and that symbol has gone away on the left-hand side. So a great way you can see this is, for example, is I have, if I just sort off description, a handful of 3,000 PSI concrete line items. Each one of these are applied to different floors. So right now I have my filter grouped by system by floor. So if I expand the office building, you can see that I have each one of my floors already pre-populated. And if I pick, say, just the first floor, it'll show me that 4,000 PSI concrete. But floors 2, 3, and 4 each have the 3,000 PSI concrete. So that's where each one of these concrete line items are coming from. If I drag this off, which will roll back up all of those like line items, I have the ability to do a lot of really neat things here. So in previous versions, if you wanted to go in and change the material price, let's say, for any one of these, you would have had to go through, find all of them, and then go to modify line item and change the material price. Here I can do it on the fly. Or maybe a better example is you may notice that 3,000 PSI concrete and 4,000 PSI concrete don't have a CSI level 1 value. That was just an error in the database. I'll probably have to go back in and fix that later. But for now, what I can do is I can hit this drop down, go to concrete, and set it. Now, because I am changing a number of line items all at the same time, it does give me a little bit of a warning because Estimator wants to make sure that you know that you are about to make sweeping changes to your estimate. So it does kind of stop you for a second and say, hey, are you sure this is what you want to do? You're about to modify a whole lot more than just the one item you selected here. So I could say yes or no, but I'm going to say yes, I know what I'm doing. And now what I've done is I've just set all of these CSI level 1 values for my 3,000 PSI concrete to be 03 concrete. If I do the same operation to 4,000 PSI, you'll notice it doesn't give me any kind of warning because that's not a rolled up item. If I were to then drag back out that column for takeoff number, you'll see the 3,000 PSI concrete now has a CSI level value or CSI level 1 value of 03 concrete. So you can use this for price changing, for classifications, for any of the properties. The only thing that it will not roll up on is going to be your quantity, is going to be your aggregate cost. So those are kind of the things that it will not define as unique. So if I happen to have, obviously, a number of different quantities for 3,000 PSI concrete, it's still going to roll those up even though the quantity column is visible, or the aggregate cost for that matter. All right. The next thing I wanted to show is, and this is going to get just a little bit more complicated, is sort of how this happens under the hood, because there were some changes to Data Manager, and I wanted to give a quick nod to how this works under the hood. So I'm showing you Data Manager now. Before I jump directly into the data that just drove the things you saw, I wanted to highlight one of the other niceties that we've improved in 2017.1.0. So on the top left, you'll see that we have a little bit of a different user interface. And what this has done is it basically declutters the information that the estimator is presented with when working inside of the database. Because this application sits on top of all of the Destiny Suite products, it could have got confusing if you were to interact with the database and you saw things like collections right next to things like rate tables, where the estimator application would be able to access rate table information but not collections, and Profiler would be able to access collections but not rate tables. So you just had a lot of extra menus that were sort of in your face and things you had to surf through that just kind of caused a little bit more of a learning curve and could have been a little confusing. So now we've separated the products out as well as the actual root database interaction itself. So here I'm only presented with things like creating databases or database profiles or interacting with user access for my databases. But if I wanted to see the specific data tied to Estimator, I can click the E, and now I see only that data that's specific to Estimator. Now it's important to note that this is still the exact same database. So if I clicked on the P for Profiler data and I change any of the values for the line items here, it's editing all of the values for line items here in my estimate or in my estimating data, because this is still the exact same data. So it doesn't split up the database. It just sort of cleans up the user interface for you. All right. A couple things that I showed earlier were around variables, being able to prompt questions. All of that is done still very simply. There's not a whole lot of extra user interface. You can just type in a question here off to the right for a takeoff question. And what I wanted to highlight is that not every one of these questions is specified. So you don't have to go through and give text for every single variable that you may ever use. If you don't specify a question here, Destiny Estimator will still generate one for you. So it'll still work the way it always has, but if you do want something a little bit more specific, you can specify that value here. All right, and then now I'm going to jump over to assemblies, and I'm going to show you the assembly that we just worked with. So I'm going to do a search for slab on grade. So here's the assembly we worked with before. The only thing I really wanted to show here is really just the simplicity of the user interface. So unlike other applications where you have concepts of variable tables and formula tables and item tables, and you've got to really structure all of this up in some perfect way for it to work nicely, here the only thing we've added to give you all the functionality I just showed you were these arrows off to the right. And all that does is allow you to order the line items in the assembly. But it also, consequently, orders the questions that are asked. And so it's just read from left to right, top to bottom, just like you'd read a book. So there's not a whole lot of complexity that we've added to give you all of this additional functionality. While I am in Data Manager, I thought I'd just hit a couple of other real niceties. One of the things that is paramount to Beck technology is this ability to get data into our software and then out of our software as you need to. We're not a company who believes that we should hijack your data, and once you're in, it's going to be like an act of Congress to get your data out of this if you either decide to go to a new platform or integrate with something else. So we have added a handful of new nice pieces of functionality that will allow you inside of Data Manager to wholesale interact with your data, to add data, and then to pull data out and put it wherever else you'd like to. And we do that as we did before with copy and paste to and from Excel. So one of the features that we really like is this ability to add a number of different WBS property values to a WBS property instantly. In the previous version, if I wanted to go through here and add values A through G into this uniformat level 1 value, I'd have to add each one individually, which took a lot of time. And if you've already got predefined things like classifications, that's not exactly something you're going to want to do for the next hour when you're looking at something like this, where it's level 3 uniformat and you've got hundreds and hundreds of items. So now what we've given you the ability to do is, let's say I want to create a new WBS property. And I'm going to call that WBS property something like CSI 50 division. And I'll give it it's going to be just a textual WBS property. I'll get into some of the other types here in a little bit. But I'll give it a value of just unknown for the default. So what now is we can switch over to our table view. So just like in line items and assemblies, WBS properties has this ability to view itself either as a tree, like this, where it's kind of nice and pretty user interface, or as a table, where it kind of looks and feels a little bit like Excel. And if you interact with the table view, these are really built for that kind of bulk edit, moving data to and from quickly operations. So this is really where we like to use these. and it gives you a kind of user interface that you may be familiar with. So here I've got my new WBS property, CSI 50 division. If I want to, I can select over the right available values. There's an ellipsis, and it brings up this window, which currently shows just the one that I've specified. But let's say over here I've got a handful, hundreds of different WBS properties that would make up a traditional CSI 50 division list. I can come through here in Excel, hit copy. All I did was hit Control-C there. Go back over to Data Manager, bring back up my window, select in here, hit Control-V, and I've just added a few hundred different values to my newly created WBS property. So now, as I come back out, it's added each one of those to my database. And you can see here, my new CSI 50 division WBS property has not only the default value of unknown, but now a nice list of all of the values that I wanted to show in here. So this is just one example of how we're trying to further support that ability to move data to and from our application as easily as possible. Now, if you may have the question of, okay, now that it's in here, make changes, can I get it out? Absolutely. The copy and paste works bidirectional. So you can take it right back to Excel, make changes, bring it back here, whatever you want to do. That kind of interaction with our costing information is actually best shown in our line items. So one of the things that is very nice now in the 2017 version is if I wanted to bulk update or bulk modify information for my line items, I can go click on that line items tab. Instead of viewing it as a tree, select the line item table view. And now I can come through and look at my line items just like I would see them in an Excel spreadsheet. And if I wanted to, I can come through and I can set pricing information or quantity information, quantity formula information, classification information by copy and paste as well. Now, you might not want to do that for every single item in your database. So another piece of functionality that we've added in 2017.1.0, which is really nice, is this quick filter row at the top. And what this gives you the ability to do is to filter on multiple pieces of criteria to find only those items that you want to interact with. So, for example, if I were to type in something like conc, so just to get to the concrete line items, it instantly filters my entire line item database to only show those values that have concrete. Now, I may also want to have some other filters put in place to say only show me those concrete line items that are above, $10 or below $3, and so I can put additional pieces of filter here to filter those items out. Now, in this case, I've only got 6 items, so it's pretty easy to see all the different values that I'm working with. But what I can do at this point is I can copy these values. So if I wanted just to go straight to Excel, let's go and we'll go and create a new worksheet here. I'll paste that in. You'll notice it pastes in the headers as well, so it actually gives you a description of each column, so you'll know what this data actually represents. I can make changes to this data here. So, for example, let's just say that I wanted to have a subcost, but I wanted that subcost to be maybe a percentage of, I don't know, let's say the equipment cost, right? So maybe the subcost is going to be 10 times the equipment cost. I can always say, hey, this equals this times 10. Help if I know how to use Excel. All right, so we'll say subcost equals the equipment, we'll say times 10. That's giving me a value, and I can just take and just drag that down. So you get all the kind of niceties of Excel, and I'm just going to copy and I'm just going to paste this as a value back into here. So with these now, I've got a series of values for subcost. I can come right back into Data Manager. I can select my subcost with that filter still applied, select it in the column that I want to apply this to, hit paste, and it's going to modify those line item subcost and not affect any of the other properties. And so now I can do things like go back and forth to and from Excel, use the power of Excel to do things like adjust pricing, use this quick filter row to find only those items that I want to interact with. And now I've just adjusted pricing for concrete for subpricing using a formula in Excel. But this entire time, Other than the parts where I was in Excel, I've been working with the SQL database. So it just kind of harkens back to our belief that we want to try to provide a user interface that's familiar and intuitive without having to jump through all the hoops that you would traditionally have to for complex SQL databases. And now all of those items are going to be updated and correct here as well. All right. Now I'm going to jump back over to Estimator. So just wanted to show you kind of the backside of what led us to this point so far. One of the other things that I wanted to show you that is really handy, although it may seem small, is Estimator does give you this ability to have multiple monitor support. So at any time, I can do things like drag off this estimate view and put it on a separate monitor and work with my estimate hole. But oftentimes what happens is, because this system can be a little bit confusing until you get used to it, is people will take and click up onto the top and start to drag the entire view. But what they don't realize, and I'm just going to drop this and leave it unpinned, what they don't realize is they're actually moving around an entire panel's worth of views. So I've got my takeoff view, my comparison view, dashboard, assembly, and estimate that I'm moving. I'm not just moving my estimate view. So what happens is oftentimes is the views get a little bit mangled, and so you end up with something where it's like, oh, how do I get that guy back? And then they're dragging your estimate view around. It can get a little wonky. So one of the things that we've added is this ability to just reset your views. So here I can always come back in here, click Reset Views. It'll reset my layout right back to the default way it was. So if for any reason you find that you're working with Estimator, you've got views of multiple monitors, maybe you unplugged a monitor, it went out, sometimes the laptop doesn't realize that the monitor's gone out, so it's still showing that view in a monitor you can't see it on anymore. You always have this nice, easy way of getting your windows back without having to go through some of the more painstaking ways that we had in the past. All right. What I'd like to do, it looks like we have about 10 minutes left, and I haven't gotten to any of the 2D quantity takeoff stuff yet, so I think what it might be good to do is just partition that piece off for a later round and focus really more on what we've got inside of Estimator. This next piece I want to show is going to get a little bit more complex, but also show some of the real power that's been added inside of this version. So there's a couple of things that we've done that are going to make this version and future versions substantially more powerful and more intelligent. So this fits into a category of a series of functionality that we've added inside of 2017.1.0 that we call just making more intelligent estimates. Sort of driving that same direction that we've had in Profiler in years past, where you can sort of put how you like to think about doing takeoff, how you like to think about building an estimate, how you quantify your objects, and make it more intelligent by giving that ability to reference things other than itself. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that here in a second. One of the things that you can do is you've always had the ability to have an unlimited number of WBS properties. When I open my WBS properties window, there's a couple things that you'll notice are different. First and foremost, to the left, you can see much more clearly where each one of these properties came from. So this symbol tells me that it's come from my database. This symbol with the E tells me that these are specific WBS properties to this estimate. Another thing that I want to point out before I move too much further forward is how I was able to specify which WBS properties we showed when I did that assembly takeoff. All you have to do here is check this column on the right, show and takeoff, and it's going to appear in any line item or assembly takeoff until it's unchecked. And all that means is it's just going to give you the estimator the ability to change those values on the fly while they're doing takeoff. So that's all I had to do to get those two values up. There is no limit to the number of WBS properties that you can present to an estimator during takeoff. But we also recognize that it's probably not very useful if they have to look at things like CSI values or WBS or uniformat values, which are very unlikely to change from one takeoff to the next. All right. You also have the ability as well to specify default values. So anything I type in here will be static and apply to all cost items, line items, and assemblies during takeoff, even if it's not presented. So you do have that also the ability to specify values here as well for default takeoff values. All right, so back to this whole new piece of complexity and intelligent estimates. One of the things that we've added is this ability to have a formulaic WBS property. And what that means is you can create a WBS property that calculates its value based off of the values of other WBS properties, based off the values of information inside of the estimate, or even based off of information that belongs to the estimate as a whole. And this gives you a lot of really nice functionality. You no longer are going to have to worry about, do they have this information available as a column inside of Estimator or inside of the estimate view. If that information can be calculated based off of any of the information you have in your estimate, you can now create that column either on the fly or build that into your database prior to. So in the example here, what I'd like to do is I'm just going to create a new WBS property, and this WBS property is going to be the total labor cost. And total labor cost isn't going to be a piece of text, it's going to be formulaic. Well, with formulaic properties, unlike text properties where I can give it a list of values, formulaic properties only have the one value. You have the ability to bring up your formula editor, so I can use this to create the formula, or I could just type in the formula on the fly if I happen to know what it is without having to use this editor. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the total labor cost is going to be the labor cost of the item that this shows up in, and then I'm going to say times, and then it's going to be multiplied by the quantity, which should get me the total labor cost. So now I'm going to hit OK, and now total labor cost has been added to each of the items. You'll also notice that the items expanded, and the reason why is because they're now also looking at the total labor cost as something that's going to affect a roll-up. And because that column has been added, that roll-up changed. So what I'd like to do, just to show you what this looks like, if I bring total labor cost right next to, let's say, quantity, and then I drag out the labor price for each of these items, you can see that that actually is computing the value for total labor cost. So of the $60,000 for this grade beam, $49,500 is coming from labor. And if I wanted to, say, change this cost, so instead of $33, it's going to be $30, those values all recompute. 10, hit 0, 10F, there we go. Those values will recompute. So if I click in here, you can see that it's calculated. It'll show you the formula. I have the ability to edit the formula on the fly for each one of these. But if I click out, it's going to show you the computed value of that column. So you now have this ability to create pretty much any type of column using any type of logic you like. If I were to retake off the item, so for example, if I come back to this grade beam, I update takeoff, I can also do it this way where I actually have, let's say, 1,750 linear feet. That would also update my labor cost, my total labor cost. So this can apply to a number of things. It can even apply to the price of the item itself. I don't want to show that just yet. We may show that in the next release. I'd like to kind of tie that back again because I think this is one of those concepts that can be a little complex at first. But what I would like to show in the next, I guess, the next presentation of the 2017 1.0 feature set is how you can actually modify a line item's cost information to be a formula instead of a number. And that is going to allow us to do all kinds of really neat things like change the price based off of things like the size of the building or even maybe the zip code that the current estimate is in to give you this concept of a regionalized pricing. Before I finish up, I wanted to show one other piece and how we use the estimate data to drive quantity information and WBS property information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of this estimate. I'm not going to save it. I'm going to go back. I've got a use that I'm going to call the conceptual template. And this template is pretty much like the other template. except for it has a handful of additional estimate data. And in the example here, it's kind of like I'm using this if I'm just going to perform a conceptual estimate. I have an assembly that I've created. And in that assembly, so let's do a find for conceptual. It's just a series of high-level items. Now, one thing you may notice is there's no variable information being asked. There's no questions that are being used to quantify that. Now, that's not entirely the case. There are actually variables used to quantify each and every one of these items. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add this assembly to my estimate as is. And you'll notice that right now it's at $306,000 for all in for an office building. And what I want to show you is that the variables that these line items are actually tied to are this estimate data off the side. So if I were to look at this inside of our data manager application, you'd see there's actually quantity formulas for each one of those items. And let me show you what that looks like on the back end. So here, we'll go for, if I can get that. So here's our conceptual assembly inside of our SQL database. And you'll notice that there's quantity formulas for each and every one of these line items. But none of these questions were asked when I took it off, and that's because each and every one of these variables was actually a piece of the estimate properties themselves. So Estimator recognized that when it came into this estimate. It saw that these were not traditional variables, that those were actually properties of the estimate. And because they were properties of the estimate, it treats them in a way that we call parametric. So that means that there's not going to be any more than one value for a thing like total site area or ground slab area. So for example here, if I start to answer these questions, and I say, for this conceptual estimate, I've got 20,000 square feet of ground slab, you'll notice that my items are all of a sudden now quantifying themselves. And let's say that I have a cantilever condition here, so my cantilever slabs are 25,000, and I've got maybe one floor below grade. Maybe I'm going to have, I don't know, 4 floors above grade. My cladding area, let's just say that's going to be, I don't know, we'll say 13,000. And I'll give it a 20%, so we'll say 0.2%, 20% glass. We'll give it a finished basement. We'll say that we've got 2 stairs on each slab. Then we'll say we'll do the same for the elevator, so we'll just say 2 there. We'll leave that at 1 acre for site area, and then the roof area we'll give that same cantilever space of 25,000. So here I've just answered a couple of high-level questions, and I have an estimate that currently is about $18 million for my office building. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this type of functionality. Like I mentioned before, that could be from things like regionalized pricing. That could be things like this, where you're using it to define a conceptual estimate. Moving forward into the next round of features that we're going to present, I guess maybe here in a week or two, I thought I'd at least let you know what's coming. We have completely revamped the underlying engine for our 2D quantity takeoff system. We've done a whole lot around just providing better quantity takeoff when it comes to 2D, just in general, giving you some functionalities like mirror and rotate. And well, I don't want to get too much into this. It looks like I'm getting played off the stage a little bit, so I'm going to stop it there. Hopefully that's enough to get you guys to come back and see the rest of this. There are a lot of new pieces of functionality that I'm really excited to show you all. And now what I'd like to do is stop for new pieces of functionality and move over towards some of the questions that you guys have been asking while I've been presenting.
Thank you, Mike. We do have several questions that have already come in. The first one being, if you add a new line item to the estimate, will it automatically calculate the total labor cost, or do you have to first assign it to the total labor cost of the VS code? So
if I add a new line item, it will automatically calculate it as long as that item has a price for labor. And some quantity, obviously. But as long as it has a price for labor and a quantity, the new total labor cost column will automatically calculate for you.
And then in Data Manager, can you now copy and paste the production rates for the labor crew from Excel? Or do you have to add each of these manually still on each line item at a time?
Yes. So in Data Manager, let me make sure I understand it correctly. If I have production values for the line items, this information is not shown in the table view. So if I were to pick a team that has a production rate, this information is currently not available inside of our line item table view. So unfortunately, in this version, you still do have to type in that production value. With that said, though, I think it's a fantastic idea that we add this to give you that ability to copy and paste wholesale. So after this meeting, I'll make sure that it gets added into our backlog.
And then someone is asking about, I believe, future functionality if we will be doing team estimating.
Absolutely. So we are just about to kick off development of our, what we have been coining team estimating. There are a number of other products that do something similar, which allows multiple estimators to work inside of an estimate at the same time. We're going to take this a handful of steps further than you've ever seen before because we have this ability to do integrated 2D and 3D quantity takeoff, and that costing is tightly integrated. For those of you who have not seen it already, we have a complete storyboard for this already mocked up. If you haven't seen it and you haven't had the ability to provide your opinion on whether or not this is a good direction or if there's some things that you want to make sure get added, please reach out to us. I'd be happy to set up a time with you to present exactly the direction we're going to go forward, exactly what we think that's going to look and feel like, and the list of functionality that's going to be available right out of the gate. We do expect that to be released, kind of middle, maybe Q2, Q3 next year. So hopefully we can hit that target. And we are about to start development, so please reach out as soon as you can if you guys are interested in helping us guide that development.
And then can you speak to if this product will ever be cloud-based?
Yeah. So we can't make any 100% promises. I will tell you that we are already starting to integrate with the cloud. We do have some prototypes already where we take advantage of things like BIM 360. Autodesk has a new modeling system that is entirely cloud-based, web-based, that we are integrated with now in our prototypes. And we do have some high-level intentions to provide a cloud-based estimating system in the future. Exactly the extent of that, what that will look and feel like, I think it's going to be up to available technology and up to the appetite of our users. So if you're passionate about that kind of thing, just like with the team estimating, please reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation on what that needs to look and feel like as we move forward.
Then a simple question that I believe we've already had in the past version, Estimator having an undo button functionality.
So we do have undo. We do support undo. It's been there from the beginning. You can find that if you just go to the home ribbon. You can see the undo. If I were to go in here and type in something and that's not what I wanted to do, I could come over here. I can hit undo, or I can just hit Control-Z, and that'll undo automatically. So we do have some shortcut keys as well.
Well, as far as for now, that's all the questions we have. I will be sending out this recording to everyone who registered, so we did have a question come in about if you can share it with your team, please feel free to. We will also set a date for the next webinar, the next 2 webinars, to show you the rest of the functionality. And with that, I want to thank Mike for showing us this upcoming release, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you for your time.